Welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. Thanks for being here. We've got another juicy story for you. So let's get started. Leroy Morrow's feet pounded the pavement, matching the rhythm of his racing heart. The cool night air stung his lungs as he ran, eyes locked on the taillights of the unfamiliar car that had swallowed his wife moments ago. 18 years of marriage, and this was how it unraveled, with a clandestine rendezvous on a Saturday night. He'd left Max, his loyal German shepherd, with old Mrs. Hanson next door. The woman had peered at him quizzically through her thick glasses when he knocked on her door. "Leroy, is everything all right?" she asked, tightening her robe. "Fine, Mrs. Hanson. Just need to run an errand. Would you mind watching Max for an hour or two?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, dear. You know I adore that big lug." As Max trotted into Mrs. Hanson's house, Leroy was already jogging down the street, his eyes never leaving the car that was now turning onto the main road. Now, as Leroy rounded another corner, he was grateful for the years of marathon training that allowed him to keep pace with the vehicle ahead. His mind raced faster than his feet. Where was Gabriella going? Who was she with? The questions burned in his throat, bitter as bile. The car finally came to a stop outside the Rusty Nail, a dive bar on the outskirts of town that Leroy had driven past countless times but never entered. He slowed to a walk, chest heaving, and ducked behind a rusted-out pickup truck in the gravel lot. From his vantage point, he watched as Gabriella emerged from the passenger side, her familiar silhouette illuminated by the harsh neon of the bar's sign. A man climbed out of the driver's seat, and Leroy felt his stomach lurch. Even in the dim light, there was no mistaking the cocky swagger of Mickey Shepard, the new football coach at Leroy's high school. Leroy's hands clenched into fists as he watched Mickey pull Gabriella close, their lips meeting in a passionate embrace that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "You're insatiable," Mickey growled, loud enough for Leroy to hear. "Can't keep your hands off me, can you?" Gabriella giggled, a sound that cut through Leroy like a knife. "Less talking, more action, Coach," she purred. Rage boiled in Leroy's veins, but he forced himself to remain still, to keep watching. He needed more than just suspicion. He needed proof. The couple stumbled towards the seedy motel adjacent to the bar, pawing at each other like hormone-crazed teenagers. Leroy waited until they disappeared into one of the rooms before approaching the motel office. Inside, he found a familiar face behind the counter, Vincent Maynard, a former student who had graduated a few years back. Vincent's eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Morrow? What are you doing here?" Leroy leaned in close, his voice low and urgent. "Vincent, I need your help. It's important." The young man shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know, Mr. Morrow. I could lose my job." "Vincent," Leroy cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. "You remember how I stayed after school for weeks helping you pass physics? How I wrote that college recommendation that got you into state? I'm calling in that favor. Now." Vincent swallowed hard, then nodded. "What do you need?" "The room number for Mickey Shepard and the woman he's with. And access to your security cameras." Vincent's eyes darted nervously to the door. "Mr. Morrow, that's not exactly legal." Leroy's gaze hardened. "Neither is what they're doing to me." "Please, Vincent. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't crucial." After a moment's hesitation, Vincent nodded. He tapped a few keys on his computer, then scribbled something on a piece of paper. "Room 17. And here's the master key. Just be careful, okay?" Leroy nodded gratefully. "I will." And Vincent? This conversation never happened. A few minutes later, Leroy stood outside room 17, his heart pounding in his ears. He could hear muffled laughter and the creak of bed springs from within. Pushing down the bile rising in his throat, he used the master key Vincent had provided to silently open the door. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a cheap lamp on the nightstand. Clothes were strewn haphazardly across the floor. Leroy moved quickly, snapping photos with his phone. Gabriella's purse, Mickey's wallet, their entangled clothes forming a damning trail to the bed. He was about to leave when Mickey's voice, thick with alcohol and arrogance, drifted from the bathroom. "Can't believe we've been pulling this off for months. That clueless bastard has no idea." Gabriella's giggle followed. Leroy's always been too trusting for his own good. It's almost too easy. Yeah, well, not all of us can be brilliant physicists, Mickey sneered. Some of us have to make do with being irresistible to his wife. Leroy's vision blurred red for a moment, but he forced himself to breathe deeply. Now wasn't the time for confrontation. He needed to be smart about this. As he slipped out of the room, Leroy heard Gabriella's voice once more. God, I love how you make me feel. Leroy never. He shut the door, cutting off her words. His hands were shaking as he made his way back to the motel office. Vincent was waiting, a USB drive in his hand. Security footage, he explained quietly. Mr. Morrow, I'm really sorry about whatever's going on. You were always one of the good ones. Leroy nodded curtly and left, the weight of betrayal settling heavily on his shoulders. The drive home was a blur, his mind replaying the night's events on a sickening loop. The house was quiet when he returned, Max's absence a stark reminder of how quickly everything had changed. Leroy headed straight for his home office, firing up his computer and beginning the task of compiling evidence. Hours passed as he sifted through their financial records. Bank statements showing unexplained withdrawals. Credit card bills with charges for hotels and restaurants he'd never visited. And now, the damning photos and security footage that confirmed his worst fears. As the first rays of dawn began to creep through the windows, Leroy heard the front door open. He tensed, listening to the familiar sound of Gabriella's footsteps as she tried to sneak up the stairs. Mom? Jason's voice, thick with sleep and confusion, stopped Gabriella in her tracks. Leroy moved to the doorway of his office, watching the scene unfold. His 17-year-old son stood at the top of the stairs, Leroy's tablet clutched in his hands. The boy's face was a mask of hurt and anger as he turned the screen towards his mother, displaying the evidence of her infidelity. We don't want you here, Jason's voice trembled, but his words were clear and cutting. Never come back home. Dad will divorce you soon. Get out. Gabriella's face drained of color. Jason, sweetie, I can explain. Explain what? Jason's voice cracked with emotion. How you've been cheating on Dad. How you've been lying to us. It's not that simple, Gabriella pleaded. Your father and I, we've been having problem. Don't you dare try to blame this on me. Leroy's voice cut through the air as he stepped out of the shadows. His tone was eerily calm, a stark contrast to the turmoil in his eyes. Gabriella whirled to face him, her expression shifting from shock to defiance. Leroy, you don't understand. Mickey and Save it. Leroy cut her off. Your things are packed. They're on the porch. I suggest you leave now, before I decide to share these lovely photos with the entire PDA. You wouldn't dare, Gabriella hissed, her eyes narrowing. I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone what a controlling, emotionally abusive. Go ahead. Leroy's smile was cold. See how well your lies hold up against hard evidence. And if you try to retaliate in any way, I promise you, every sordid detail of your affair will become public knowledge. You can't do this. Gabriella's voice took on a pleading tone. What about Jason? What about our family? You should have thought about that before you started screwing the football coach, Jason spat. His young face twisted with disgust. For a moment, Gabriella looked like she might argue further. Then, without another word, she turned and fled down the stairs. The front door slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the suddenly empty house. Jason sagged against the wall, the tablet slipping from his grasp. Leroy moved quickly, wrapping his arms around his son. I'm sorry, Jace. I'm so sorry you had to see that. The boy clung to him, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. How could she do this to us, Dad? Leroy held him tightly, his mind already racing ahead to the battles that were sure to come. I don't know, son, but we'll get through this. Together. As they stood there, father and son united in their pain, Leroy's phone buzzed. A text from Gabriella. This isn't over. You'll regret this. Leroy deleted the message without replying. He guided Jason to the kitchen, his movements automatic as he started brewing a pot of coffee. They had a long day ahead of them. What happens now? Jason asked, his voice small and uncertain. Leroy took a deep breath, considering his words carefully. Now, We protect ourselves. I'll be contacting a lawyer first thing Monday morning. We'll need to secure our finances, change the locks. There's a lot to do. Jason nodded, his young face set with determination. I want to help. Whatever you need, Dad. Pride swelled in Leroy's chest, momentarily displacing the pain. Thank you, son. We're going to need to be strong for each other. As the coffee maker gurgled, Leroy's mind raced through the steps ahead. He'd need to inform the school administration, get ahead of any rumors Gabriella or Mickey might try to spread. There would be legal battles, custody arrangements to sort out, but as he looked at Jason, saw the trust and love in his son's eyes, Leroy felt a surge of resolve. They would weather this storm. And when the dust settled, Gabriella and Mickey would learn the hard way that they had grossly underestimated Leroy Morrow. The game had changed, and Leroy was ready to play for keeps. As the sun rose fully, casting its light on a world forever changed, Leroy Morrow made a silent vow. He would not let this betrayal break him. He would not let Gabriella and Mickey's actions destroy the life he had built. And he would sure as hell make them regret ever crossing him. Dad. Jason's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Are you okay? Leroy managed a small smile. I will be, Jace. We both will be. It's going to be tough for a while, but we've got each other. That's what matters. Jason nodded, then his face hardened. I hate her for what she's done to you. To us. I know, son, but don't let that hate consume you. We're better than that. We'll handle this the right way, and we'll come out stronger on the other side. As they sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and planning their next moves, Leroy felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The initial shock and pain were still there, but they were overshadowed by a steely determination. Gabriella had made her choice. Now it was time for Leroy to make his. And he chose to fight. For his dignity, for his son, and for the future they deserved. The betrayal had blindsided him, but Leroy Morrow was far from defeated. In fact, he was just getting started. Monday morning arrived with a sense of foreboding. Leroy Morrow stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie with steady hands that belied the turmoil within. The events of the weekend felt like a distant nightmare, but the empty bed behind him was a stark reminder of his new reality. As he drove to Oak Ridge High, Leroy's mind raced through potential scenarios. He knew confronting Mickey Shepard was inevitable, but he was determined to maintain control. The last thing he needed was to give that smug bastard any ammunition. The teacher's lounge was abuzz with the usual Monday morning chatter when Leroy entered. A few colleagues shot him curious glances, no doubt sensing the tension radiating off him. He poured himself a cup of coffee, pointedly ignoring the corner where Mickey usually held court with his sycophantic admirers. Well, if it isn't the brilliant Mr. Morrow. Leroy turned slowly, coming face to face with Mickey Shepard's cocky grin. The football coach leaned against the counter, his muscled arms folded across his chest. Heard you've been having some trouble at home, Mickey continued, his voice dripping with false concern. Real shame. Hope everything works out for you. Leroy took a sip of his coffee, his expression neutral. I appreciate your concern, Mickey, but I think you should be more worried about your own future. Mickey's grin faltered for a moment before returning full force. Is that a threat, Morrow? Because I gotta say, coming from a scrawny little physics nerd, it's not very intimidating. In one fluid motion, Mickey closed the distance between them, using his larger frame to loom over Leroy. Maybe you should stick to your equations and leave the real men's business to guys like me. The lounge had gone silent, all eyes on the confrontation. Leroy set his coffee cup down with deliberate calm. You know, Mickey, there's an interesting principle in physics called leverage. It states that even a small force, applied correctly, can overcome a much larger one. Mickey's brow furrowed in confusion. What the hell are you? His words were cut off as Leroy moved with lightning speed. In a series of precise movements, he grabbed Mickey's wrist, twisted, and used the larger man's momentum against him. Before anyone could blink, Mickey was face down on the floor, his arm painfully wrenched behind his back. You see, Leroy continued conversationally, it's all about applying pressure to the right points. A concept you might want to familiarize yourself with, both on and off the field. The lounge erupted in shocked murmurs. Mickey struggled. his face red with exertion and humiliation. "Get off me, you psycho. I'll have your job for this." "Mr. Morrow. Mr. Shepard. My office now." Principal Chris Sullivan's voice cut through the chaos. Leroy released Mickey, stepping back as the coach scrambled to his feet. "This isn't over," Mickey hissed, rubbing his sore arm. Leroy met his glare evenly. "Oh, I think it is." In Sullivan's office, Mickey launched into a tirade before the door had fully closed. "Did you see what that maniac did to me? I want him fired, suspended, arrested." Sullivan held up a hand, silencing him. "Enough, Mickey." "Leroy, care to explain what happened?" Leroy nodded, his demeanor calm and professional. "Certainly, Chris. But before I do, there's something you need to see." He pulled out a USB drive and handed it to the principal. "This contains security footage from the Rusty Nail Motel, taken this past Saturday night. It shows Coach Shepard engaging in inappropriate behavior with my wife." Mickey's face drained of color. "You're bluffing. There's no way." "I assure you, it's quite real." Leroy cut him off. "Along with credit card receipts, text messages, and eyewitness accounts from several of our students who've seen you two together." Sullivan's expression hardened as he plugged in the drive and watched the footage. After a few moments, he turned to Mickey, disgust evident in his eyes. "Is this true, Shepard?" Mickey's bravado crumbled. "Look, it's not what it seems. We're both consenting adults and—" "Save it," Sullivan snapped. "You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. I suggest you leave the premises now before I have security escort you out." As Mickey stormed out, slamming the door behind him, Sullivan turned to Leroy. "I'm sorry you had to go through this, Leroy. We'll handle the situation discreetly." Leroy nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, Chris. I appreciate your understanding." As he left the office, Leroy couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. Round one had gone to him, but he knew the battle was far from over. News of the affair spread through Oak Ridge like wildfire. By lunchtime, whispers and sidelong glances followed Leroy through the hallways. But to his surprise, the looks weren't of judgment or pity. Instead, he saw respect and even admiration in the eyes of his colleagues and students. Meanwhile, across town, Gabriella Morrow was having a very different experience. She sat in her real estate office, staring at her silent phone. The calls that usually flooded in on a Monday morning were conspicuously absent. Her assistant, Jenny, knocked timidly on the door. "Ms. Morrow?" "The Petersons called. They want to cancel their listing appointment this afternoon." Gabriella's grip tightened on her desk. "Did they say why?" Jenny shifted uncomfortably. "They said they didn't feel comfortable working with someone of your character." "My character?" Gabriella's voice rose sharply. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "I'm sorry, Ms. Morrow. It's just, people are talking about you and Coach Shepard." Gabriella's blood ran cold. How had it spread so quickly? She dismissed Jenny with a wave, then frantically began scrolling through her social media. Her inbox was flooded with messages, ranging from disappointed to outright hostile. "This can't be happening," she muttered, her perfectly manicured nails clacking against her phone screen as she typed out a hasty post. "Friends and clients, I'm deeply hurt by the vicious rumors circulating about my personal life. My husband and I have been experiencing difficulties, and Coach Shepard has been a supportive friend during this trying time. Any insinuations of impropriety are baseless and cruel. I ask for privacy and understanding as we navigate this difficult period." She hit post, then sat back, taking a deep breath. She could salvage this. She just needed to control the narrative. Across town, Mickey Shepard paced his small apartment, phone pressed to his ear. "Pick up, damn it," he growled as Gabriella's voicemail kicked in for the third time. A text from his assistant coach pinged. "Dude, what the hell? The whole team's talking about you banging Morrow's wife. Tell me it's not true." Mickey hurled the phone across the room with a roar of frustration. This couldn't be happening. He'd worked too hard, climbed too far, to let it all slip away now. His phone buzzed again from its new resting place under the couch. He retrieved it, seeing Gabriella's name on the screen. "About time," he snapped. "Have you seen what's happening?" We need to get our stories straight. Gabriella's voice was tense. I've already made a statement on social media. We're just friends. You've been supporting me through marital difficulties. Got it. Mickey scoffed. You think that weak-ass story is gonna cut it? We need something bigger. Something to take the heat off us and put it on that sanctimonious prick Leroy. Like what? I don't know. Say he was abusive, controlling. That's why you turned to me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mickey, that's a serious accusation. I can't just. You can and you will, Mickey snarled. Unless you want your precious reputation completely destroyed. We're in this together, sweetheart. Time to pick a side. As he hung up, Mickey didn't notice the small device blinking steadily from the potted plant on his windowsill. In an unmarked van across the street, Marco Dudley, private investigator, smiled as he adjusted his headphones. Got you? You son of a bitch, he muttered, hitting the stop button on his recorder. Back at Oak Ridge High, Leroy was surprised to find a small crowd gathered outside his classroom after the final bell. Former students, fellow teachers, even a few parents stood waiting, concern etched on their faces. Mr. Morrow, one of his former students, now a college freshman, stepped forward. We heard what happened. We just wanted you to know. We're here for you. Whatever you need. Leroy felt a lump form in his throat. Thank you, he managed, genuinely touched by the show of support. As the crowd dispersed, Leroy's phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Got something big. Meet me at your place ASAP. Leroy hurried home, his mind racing. As he pulled into his driveway, he saw Marco's nondescript van already parked on the street. Inside, Marco was waiting with Jason, a smile on his face. You're gonna want to hear this, he said, hitting play on his recorder. As Mickey and Gabriella's conversation filled the room, Leroy felt a mix of anger and vindication wash over him. Jason's face darkened with each word. They're trying to paint you as the bad guy, the teenager spat. After everything they've done, Leroy placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Let them try. We've got the truth on our side. Marco nodded. And now we've got proof of their conspiracy. This'll be gold in court, Leroy. As Marco left, promising to get the recording properly processed and authenticated, Leroy turned to Jason. You okay, kiddo? Jason nodded, his jaw set in determination. Yeah, I can't believe Mom would stoop so low. Leroy sighed. People do desperate things when they're backed into a corner. But we're not going to let them win. We're going to take the high road. How? Jason asked skeptically. Leroy smiled. By focusing on what matters. Speaking of which, don't you have a science fair project to work on? Jason's eyes lit up. Yeah, we're building a scale model of a sustainable city. It's gonna be awesome. As they headed to the garage to work on the project, Leroy felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wouldn't let Gabriella and Mickey's schemes distract him from what truly mattered, his son, his students, and the life they were rebuilding together. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Leroy threw himself into preparing his students for the upcoming state science fair, determined not to let his personal turmoil affect their chances. The kids responded with enthusiasm, staying late after school and even coming in on weekends to perfect their projects. It was during one of these late-night sessions, just days before the fair, that disaster struck. Leroy had stayed behind to lock up after the last student left. As he did a final sweep of the science lab, he noticed something off about one of the main projects, a complex model demonstrating clean energy distribution in urban environments. Upon closer inspection, his heart sank. Crucial components had been damaged, wires cut, and the central computer system wiped clean. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately sabotaged their work. Leroy's first instinct was to call the police, but he hesitated. A formal investigation would take time they didn't have, and it would crush his students' spirits. No, he needed to handle this himself. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marco. I need your help. And bring your best surveillance equipment. The next morning, Leroy gathered his dejected students in the lab. I know this looks bad, he said, looking at their crestfallen faces. But we're not giving up. We're going to rebuild, better than before. And we're going to catch whoever did this. As the kids set to work, fueled by a mix of determination and righteous anger, Leroy pulled aside his most trusted student, Sarah. "I need your help with something," he said quietly, outlining his plan. That night, the lab was dark and silent. Hidden cameras, courtesy of Marco, covered every angle. Leroy and Sarah crouched in a supply closet, watching the feeds on a tablet. Hours passed. Leroy was beginning to think he'd miscalculated when a shadow passed across one of the screens. The door to the lab creaked open, and a familiar figure slipped inside. "I knew it," Sarah whispered as Mickey Shepard's face came into view. They watched as Mickey approached the partially rebuilt project, a pair of wire cutters in his hand. Just as he was about to strike, Leroy burst from the closet. "Freeze!" Mickey whirled, his face a mask of shock and rage. "You! How did you? Did you really think I'd leave the lab unguarded after what you did?" Leroy's voice was cold. "It's over, Mickey. We've got you on camera. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, attempted sabotage. Your coaching career is done." Mickey lunged, swinging wildly. But Leroy was prepared. He sidestepped the attack, using Mickey's momentum to send him crashing into a lab table. By the time Mickey regained his feet, Marco and 2 police officers had entered the room. As Mickey was led away in handcuffs, spitting threats and obscenities, Leroy turned to his wide-eyed student. "You okay, Sarah?" She nodded, a grin spreading across her face. "That was awesome, Mr. Morrow. Wait till the others hear about this." Leroy chuckled. "Let's focus on finishing our project first. We've got a science fair to win." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. News of Mickey's arrest spread quickly, cementing Leroy's status as a local hero. But he paid little attention to the gossip, pouring all his energy into helping his students rebuild their project. The night before the fair, Leroy surveyed the finished model with pride. It wasn't just as good as the original, it was better. His students had taken the setback as a challenge, innovating and improving at every step. "We did it, Mr. Morrow," Jason said, clapping his father on the back. "We actually did it." Leroy smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the late hour or the coffee they'd been mainlining. "No, son. You did it. All of you. I just provided the coffee and moral support." The state science fair was a blur of nervous energy and last-minute adjustments. Leroy watched from the sidelines as his students presented their project to the judges, fielding questions with confidence and enthusiasm. When the winners were announced, Leroy wasn't surprised to hear Oak Ridge High called for not 1, but 3 top awards. The students erupted in cheers, mobbing him in a group hug that nearly knocked him off his feet. As they posed for photos with their trophies, Leroy caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Gabriella stood at the back of the auditorium, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met for a moment before she turned and walked away. Leroy felt a twinge of something. Not regret, exactly, but a sense of finality. The last thread connecting him to his old life had been severed. He turned back to his celebrating students, pushing the thought from his mind. This was his life now, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Gabriella Morrow stared at her reflection in the mirror of the cheap motel room she now called home. Her once flawless makeup was smudged, dark circles prominent under her eyes. How had it come to this? Next to her, Mickey Shepard sprawled on the unmade bed, flipping through channels on the ancient TV. "Would you stop primping already? We've got work to do." Gabriella's lip curled in disgust. The initial thrill of their affair had long since faded, leaving behind only bitterness and desperation. "And what brilliant plan have you cooked up this time, Mickey? Your last one worked out so well." Mickey sat up, his eyes narrowing. "Watch your tone, sweetheart. Remember, we're in this together. Unless you want to crawl back to your ex and beg for scraps." The thought of facing Leroy again made Gabriella's stomach churn. She'd underestimated him, badly. The meek, predictable husband she'd taken for granted had transformed into a formidable opponent, systematically dismantling the life she'd built. "Fine," she snapped. "What's the plan?" Mickey's grin was all predator. "We're going to hit him where it hurts. His precious reputation." As Mickey outlined his scheme, Gabriella felt a flicker of doubt. Fabricating evidence of abuse seemed like a dangerous gamble. But what choice did she have? Her real estate business was in shambles, her social circle had abandoned her, and the divorce proceedings were not going in her favor. "It'll work," Mickey assured her, mistaking her silence for hesitation. "Trust me. Once we're done, Leroy Morrow won't know what hit him." Across town, in a sleek office overlooking Main Street, Leroy sat across from his lawyer, Melody Hancock. The petite, silver-haired woman exuded an aura of calm competence that had immediately put Leroy at ease when they first met. "So," Melody said, shuffling through a stack of papers, "our sources indicate that Gabriella and her companion are planning something big for the upcoming hearing. Are you prepared for whatever they might throw at us?" Leroy nodded, his expression grim. "As ready as I can be. But I have to admit, I'm worried about Jason. This whole ordeal has been hard on him." Melody's eyes softened. "That's understandable. But from what you've told me, he's a strong kid. And he has you in his corner." "Thanks, Melody. So, what's our strategy?" The lawyer's smile turned predatory. "We go on the offensive. I've compiled a comprehensive record of Gabriella's infidelity, financial misconduct, and recent attempts at sabotage. By the time I'm done, the judge will see exactly who the real victim is in this situation." As Leroy left the office, he felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. The final showdown was approaching, and he was determined to emerge victorious, not just for himself, but for Jason. The day of the hearing arrived, the courthouse steps crowded with reporters and curious onlookers. Leroy strode up confidently, Jason at his side. They ignored the shouted questions and camera flashes, focusing on the battle ahead. Inside, Gabriella and Mickey were already seated, their heads bent close in whispered conversation. Gabriella's eyes widened slightly when she saw Leroy, quickly averting her gaze. Mickey, however, met Leroy's stare with a smug grin. As the proceedings began, Gabriella's lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, launched into an impassioned speech about his client's years of suffering under an emotionally abusive husband. He presented a series of emails and text messages, purportedly showing Leroy's controlling and manipulative behavior. Leroy's fists clenched under the table, fury rising in his chest. It was all lies, carefully crafted half-truths designed to paint him as a monster. He glanced at Jason, seeing the same anger reflected in his son's eyes. When it was Melody's turn to present their case, she rose slowly, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the theatrical performance of Gabriella's lawyer. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and steady, "the evidence presented by the opposing counsel is a fabrication, a desperate attempt by Mrs. Morrow and her paramour to manipulate this court. I have here a comprehensive record of the true facts in this case." Over the next hour, Melody systematically dismantled Gabriella's claims. She presented financial records showing Gabriella's misuse of joint accounts to fund her affair. Eyewitness testimonies from neighbors and colleagues painted a picture of Leroy as a devoted husband and father. And finally, she played the damning recording of Mickey and Gabriella plotting to discredit Leroy. As the evidence mounted, Gabriella seemed to shrink in her seat. Mickey's smug expression had long since vanished, replaced by barely contained panic. Leroy, for his part, remained stoic, his eyes fixed on the judge. When Melody finished her presentation, the courtroom was silent. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, surveyed the room with piercing eyes. "I've seen a lot in my years on the bench," she said finally, her voice heavy with disapproval, "but rarely have I encountered such a blatant attempt to pervert the course of justice. Mrs. Morrow, Mr. Shepherd, your actions are reprehensible." Turning to Leroy, her expression softened slightly. "Mr. Morrow, in light of the evidence presented, I am granting your petition for divorce. You will receive full custody of your son, Jason, and retain ownership of the family home. Mrs. Morrow, you will be responsible for all legal fees incurred during these proceedings." As the judge's gavel fell, sealing the verdict, a wave of relief washed over Leroy. It was over. They had won. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around them, shouting questions. Leroy put a protective arm around Jason, guiding him through the crowd. From the corner of his eye, he saw Gabriella and Mickey being cornered by a particularly aggressive group of journalists. "Dad," Jason said quietly as they reached their car, "is it really over?" Leroy smiled, squeezing his son's shoulder. The legal battle is, kiddo. But something tells me Gabriella and Mickey aren't done trying to cause trouble. He was right. A week after the court's decision, Gabriella and Mickey appeared on a local news station, painting themselves as victims of a vindictive husband and a biased legal system. Leroy Morrow has everyone fooled, Gabriella said, her eyes brimming with carefully rehearsed tears. He's manipulated the entire town, turned my own son against me. I just want the truth to come out. Mickey nodded solemnly beside her. As an educator, I feel it's my duty to speak out against this injustice. Mr. Morrow's influence over the school board and local officials is deeply concerning. Leroy watched the interview with a mixture of disgust and determination. He'd anticipated this move, and he was ready to counter it. The next day, he called a town hall meeting. The community center was packed, curious faces turning to watch as Leroy took the stage. Jason sat in the front row, offering a supportive nod. I know many of you saw last night's interview with my ex-wife and Mickey Shepherd, Leroy began, his voice steady. I'm not here to sling mud or make accusations. I'm here to present facts. Over the next hour, Leroy laid out the full story of Gabriella and Mickey's affair, their attempts to discredit him, and the evidence that had swayed the judge. He played recordings, showed financial documents, and presented testimonies from students and colleagues. I don't ask for your sympathy, he concluded. I only ask that you consider the facts and draw your own conclusions. Thank you. The room erupted in applause as Leroy stepped down from the podium. People surged forward, offering handshakes and words of support. In the back of the room, a grim-faced man in a suit quietly took notes. The fallout was swift and merciless. The State Real Estate Board launched an ethics investigation into Gabriella's conduct, suspending her license pending the results. Mickey found himself facing potential criminal charges for his role in the science fair sabotage. Weeks turned into months. Leroy and Jason settled into a new routine, slowly rebuilding their lives. They remodeled the house, erasing painful memories and creating a fresh start. Leroy threw himself into his work, his dedication earning him a promotion to head of the science department. Before they knew it, Jason's graduation day had arrived. Leroy stood at the podium, looking out over a sea of caps and gowns, his chest swelling with pride. Life will test you, he said, his voice carrying across the hushed auditorium. It will throw challenges at you that seem insurmountable. But remember this, integrity and resilience are not just words. They are choices we make every day. Choose wisely, and there is no obstacle you cannot overcome. As he spoke, a movement at the back of the room caught his eye. Gabriella slipped in, looking haggard and remorseful. Their eyes met for a brief moment before Leroy continued his speech. After the ceremony, as families and friends mingled on the lawn, Gabriella approached hesitantly. Leroy, Jason, I don't know what to say. Leroy's expression remained neutral. I think you've said plenty over the past few months, Gabriella. She flinched at his tone but pressed on. I know I've made terrible mistakes. I miss my son. Jason, please, can we talk? Leroy looked at Jason, allowing him to make his own decision. Without hesitation, Jason turned his back on Gabriella. I have nothing to say to you, he said coldly, walking away. Leroy watched his ex-wife's face crumple, feeling a twinge of, not pity, exactly, but a sort of detached sadness for what might have been. Goodbye, Gabriella, he said quietly, following his son. That evening, Leroy and Jason hosted a graduation party. Their home was filled with laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the tension that had permeated it months before. Friends, family, and supporters gathered to celebrate not just Jason's achievement, but the strength and resilience both Morrows had shown. As Leroy raised a toast to his son, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. They had weathered the storm, emerging stronger and closer than ever. The future stretched out before them, bright and full of possibility. To new beginnings, Leroy said, clinking his glass against Jason's. Jason grinned, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and determination. And to unbreakable bonds. As the party continued around them, father and son shared a moment of understanding. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bond forged in adversity and tempered by love. The night wore on, filled with music, laughter, and the warmth of true friendship. And as Leroy looked around at the life he and Jason had rebuilt, he knew that the best was yet to come.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.